So hi, everybody. We're very excited to have you here. This is an interview between us and the GMAC, the Graduate Management Admission Council. And in today's interview, the GMAC is going to give us an expert reply to some of the most urgent or most interesting questions that we've collected from our students, you guys. We're going to jump in and start talking about the questions. Student asks us, I got a 390 in the previous test, but I need at least a 500. I only have 1 month to do so. Do I have a chance? Should I do it? Should I retake the test?
Again, my answer will be it depends. It depends on how you use that 1 month. And let me actually share some interesting data in this context,
Okay.
Dave. So let me just sort of walk through the chart here on the left for people on the call. So we looked at people, who tested more than once. So on the left, on the y-axis is the average score gain for someone who tested more than once. On the x-axis is the number of attempts you took. So everybody took one test, and then if you tested again, that would be test number 2. Test number 3, and so on. And we tried to sort of split this up by your score band just to see what impact retesting could have depending on where you are and what the average score gain could be. So obviously you see these lines are all positive sloping, which is a good thing, which sort of generally says that if you do test again, there's no guarantee, but we do see that scores do tend to go up. Now, if they go up and how much they go up totally depends on you. Again, these are averages, right? I think it's also important to note that when in the same data, we saw that the range actually varied from -100 to +150. So, we saw several people whose scores when they tested again were actually lower than what they had tested previously. And we've actually been tracking this fairly consistently, and this has stayed pretty stable. But just to walk through one of these lines as an example, so let's look at the first purple line here, the 200 to 490. Obviously you're in the lower score band, so the average score gain that you could expect if you test again is likely to be higher because you have more room to expand your score, versus this blue line, which is someone who scored between a 700 to a 790. They just don't have a whole lot of room to grow. So what we see is average gains are lower, which is understandable, and we see a similar distribution. But especially when you're in the higher score band, especially in the 700 plus. There is an opportunity for you to increase your score, but again, you only have a few score points to play with. So the test is very reliable, and it's a very accurate predictor of your ability. So at some point, you could potentially start seeing some diminishing returns. So when I get asked this question, my most common response to this is it really depends on 2 factors. One is the approach you had to your first exam, and the amount of investment you've put in between your first and second exam, because a lot of candidates actually approach the first exam almost as a practice exam. They just want to feel it out. They want to see what the experience is like, what the questions is like. They almost use it as a quasi-diagnostic, and then build a study plan based on what the first exam told them. Several candidates don't take that approach. And then obviously, as I said, what you do between tests is equally, if not more important, in terms of your ability to improve your score.
So that's really interesting. This graph is something we hadn't seen before. We can just stay on it for a second. So what we can see here is that, let me know if I'm reading this right. What we can see is that there's definitely pretty much across the board an advantage to taking the test again, at least the first time. But it matters a whole lot what your previous level was, and the lower it was, the bigger average bump we get from a second test. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm off my camera just so maybe my audio quality will be better, but I'm still here. Great, and then when we look later on, we can see, as you described, and just making sure that I understand this correctly, because it's pretty interesting data, that for the top scorers, the 700 scorers, we can actually, as you said, sometimes see diminishing returns. And below that, we still see improvements, but they are more pronounced. Again, lower your preliminary score was, more pronounced the advantage that you're going to get from retaking the test again and again. Right?
Yeah. And I think how you use your time between the two administrations is really important, because you know, if you just show up without any additional practice, almost always you will get the exact same score.
Right. That makes sense. Okay, let's keep going then. I think you wanted to show us some other information.
Yeah, I was just wanting to share some broad data around, you know, the impact that prep has, you know, across different. So this chart on the left, you know, and this is sort of average data across all of our portfolio. So I just want to sort of call that out, that this may not be sort of, you know, this should not be sort of taken as personalized advice, but just to sort of highlight a point that, you know, obviously we do see people have different approaches to prep on how they treat prep, and the amount of time they spend preparing for the GMAT across countries and across different school bands, you know, across different parts of the world. And this is self-reported data from candidates. You know, this is not something like we can track, but this is what candidates have told us. You know, we do see about, you know, almost 60% of candidates do spend over 50 hours preparing for the exam. And, you know, generally people who score high tend to see sort of in the high double digits, sometimes in the low 100s in terms of what they think is the total amount of time they've spent preparing for the exam. Now, again, you know, it is, you know, practice always pays. So, you know, is that a guarantee? No, but does it improve your chances of getting a better score? Absolutely.
Yeah, we can definitely see here a strong correlation between more practice and a higher score.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So obviously, you know, as we all study in the critical reasoning section, correlation isn't always causation. It could be that the students that are the most serious are the ones that go and study a lot, and that's part of the reason. But it definitely seems from all the data we have that the more you practice up to a certain point, the higher score you're probably setting yourself up to get. So this question has to do with improving in Quant. If I want to boost my Quant score from a 45 to a 50, but I just can't seem to get the hard questions right, what should I do?
I think that's an interesting question. I think the most sort of I'll try and attempt it to answer it in the best possible way I can. I think some of it has to do with the notion of item adaptive testing. So if you look at the GMAT, it starts you off at a medium level of difficulty, and then based on how you're doing, it'll present a question which is just higher or just lower than what it believes your ability level to be at that point in time. And I think that's sort of the framework I would encourage candidates to think about as they're trying to get better is, you know, do a diagnostic, you know, whatever your study preferences, if you're working with a test prep organization like yours, or with a personal tutor, or you're studying by yourself, you know, if you want to get to some place, the most important thing to know is where you currently are, right? What's your starting point? Because if you don't know where you are, you can't chart the course forward. So, you know, start with, you know, understanding where you are, and, you know, practice questions that are at or slightly above your difficulty level and slowly raise that bar. If you start with an easy question and you say, oh, this was too easy, let me just straight away go to what the guide or my tutor says is a very difficult question, you're going to sort of land up with some dissonance in your practice experience. So the best strategy, or the most recommended strategy, I would say, would be to practice questions that are at your appropriate ability level, and then, as an item adaptive test would do, try and keep challenging yourself to the next higher ability level or the next higher difficulty level. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? Oh, sorry, yeah, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. You've got to sort of take a single step at a time and get there, versus short, quickly dash your way to the end.
So I think this is a very interesting graph that you're just showing us here, because we often get questions from students that are saying things like, oh, I just tried the hardest ones and I'm going to try other hard ones in order to improve. And what I think this shows us, and it's something that we also see, is that you don't really gain much from doing a question that's above your level when you're not ready for it. And rather, you only gain if you do something that's at your level or maybe a little bit above that you can improve to. And if you do something that's too high, you're not really gaining anything except perhaps getting frustrated. So some students have asked us whether they should take Quant before verbal or verbal before Quant. Maybe they should even start with the essay or the integrated reasoning. Are there any recommendations on this?
Yeah, no, I think that's another great question. And I think just for some context, I mean, the reason we did section order choice was really to give candidates flexibility, because we heard from the market that different people have different choices or preferences. So I think my position on this is that we don't recommend what is the right order. Really, the advice is whatever works best for you. And I think some of it has to do with as you interact with candidates yourself, is what are the different test taking strategies that work best for a specific candidate. And this is something you discover through practice, through more and more practice examinations, that generally some people have a stronger quant or a verbal bent. Then also it's the testing approach. Some people like to warm up into a section and they say, what, that in the first 30 minutes or so, my brain takes some time to warm up, versus some people sort of have this approach that, I want to get while I'm fresh out of, while my mind is fresh, I want to get, the most challenging parts out of the way. So, I mean, this is a very simplistic 2x2. The point really I'm trying to make it is really depends on what do you think you're good at and how do you want to approach your strengths and how you want to tackle the sections that you think you sometimes struggle with. What I will say is a few things on this, that psychometrically it does not matter. And I think that was one of the reasons we were very comfortable introducing this feature, is that from a score perspective, the section order choice has no psychometric bearing on the score. So the school actually doesn't even get to know in the score report what order you took the exam in, because they think a score is a score. And all our analysis and pilot testing, etc., validated this fact that the section order choice did not create a psychometric difference in the score. Our goal is for the candidate to feel,
Just to make sure I understand you on this point, you're saying there's no advantage in terms of, I don't get a higher relative score to a harder section first, or the test doesn't like people that do the verbal before the quant or something like that. It can't be expressed in our score in a direct way.
Yeah, I think the benefit is really making you, the candidate, feel more confident and prepared that you're able to do your personal best, is really the point. And I think we see that in some of the choices. This is just a high level summary of, and this is all global and this varies by region, but how are people making choices? So we still see actually about 15% of candidates choosing to start off with what was traditionally the original order of the GMAT, which was the essay first. Though we see sort of a significant portion of candidates wanting to take quant first, and about a third of candidates who actually start off with the verbal first. And again, it depends on what you think works best for you. And I highly encourage candidates to practice a few exams in different orders and see what it feels like and what they feel most comfortable with.
Great. So just to recap, if in the first question we had kind of a very clear answer, that is, you should guess and you did not skip, here our answer is much more, it doesn't actually matter in terms of how the test sees it, just do what feels right for you, right?
Yep.
Okay, great. So, so the bottom line is you guys have to figure out what works best for you. And as you said at the end, I think that's a very important point. Don't figure it out on the day of the test, but rather practice beforehand what your strategy is going to be, what the order is going to be. Do it in a few mock tests and make sure you know I'm going to pick verbal first and then quant or whatever it may be. But know beforehand how you want to do it.
Yeah, and I think coming into the test center with your choice already made is highly recommended.
So I think we're gonna jump ahead here and go to questions that you wanted to ask wanted to ask us. Great.
So thank you, Dave. I think just in your experience, what have you found to be most important to someone's success or ability to succeed in their GMAT prep journey?
So thank you for the question. So the number one thing that we found is students' ability and desire to learn from their mistakes. And I think actually the last question we looked at was maybe a good segue into this one, because what it showed us is that you definitely, obviously, learn from practicing, but you don't learn from practicing anything. You don't learn, not all questions are created equal. What you learn from is when you study questions that are at your level or a little bit above your level, and you're willing to really look at them and go back and study from them. So, sometimes we hear stuff from students like, I'm studying hundreds of questions and I'm not improving or improving, only a little bit. And that doesn't surprise us because just doing more and more questions is not the key to student success. The key is doing perhaps less questions, but being willing to put in the work and look at your mistakes, which is obviously something most of us don't really like doing. We like looking at our successes, but it's very important. And I'll give you a few examples. So most of our students, and I think this is true for students in general, most students are used to solving things in a straightforward way, right? We call this the precise approach. They look for an exact, a rule-based answer to every question. They look to get the answer on their own and only then look in the answers and find it, which is okay, but it can take a lot of time, and sometimes it can be confusing or something like that. And the real improvement starts when students realize that there are different ways to get to the answer in many questions. And this can be something like using what we call alternative tools, using things like symmetry and geometry, or picking symbol numbers when the answers all contain variables. And these things can actually get us much quicker to the answer. And the point where students really save a lot of time and improve a lot is when they realize that a lot of the questions, what's key is understanding the logic behind them, such as using inference and critical reasoning questions, or using the logic behind certain data sufficiency questions. And so what I'm trying to say here is the key is being willing to A, put in the time to look at your mistakes, and B, also be honest about what you got wrong. I'll give a different example. A lot of students often, when they get things wrong, they look at them, they understand the correct answer, and they say, oh, I just got confused. I actually know this one. This isn't something I don't really know. I just got confused this specific time. But if a lot of times these mistakes repeat themselves, and students that are the ones that really improve are the ones that are willing to stop and say, well, wait, even if I know how I could get it right this time, why did I get it wrong What is the small, perhaps it could be something silly, but what made me get it wrong? And then, and now I want to realize, what can I do right the next time when I see a question which obviously isn't going to be identical to this one, but which has the same characteristics, which made me get this one wrong. So that's what we work on. That's what we find to be the most important. And the term that we use that students that study the right way, they develop what we call cognitive flexibility, the ability to choose the right tool for the right question. And when I say the right tool, I mean the right tool for them, because some students are going to do better going sort of straightforward way. Some students are going to do better with logic. And not necessarily all across the board. You know, some students only do precise, other students logical, but rather question by question, students can differently and better. So what we find to be the most important to student success is the desire and the ability to look at your mistakes and to really kind of break down the different ways you could have solved it and realize what was the right tool for you. Does that make sense to you? I'm curious from your perspective.
Does, and I think I completely that makes a lot of sense, and resonates very well with my own experience interacting with candidates and some of your peers and other candidates all over the world. That at the end of the day, this is a test of your commitment as well, right? It's a demonstration of your commitment to the process, to your ability to learn, and actually schools see it that way as well. So I think a candidate will be better off for themselves with that right mindset and attitude and the willingness to learn.
That's it for now. I wanted to say thank you very much, Vineet, for joining me here and giving us all this great insight into these questions that our students had and that we had. And of course, I wanted to say thank you to you guys for being with us.